This stuff here, Yerushalmi Yoma, in the article Ozva edition, we're at the top. We're going to start from the top of Beis and Aleph because I want to bring down the interesting Shinu Schos there at right at the top of the page, even though we went a bit further yesterday. And that is Minma Dema Rabbi Yomana, and in the Vilna that is on Daf Aleph on the Beis, and it is 8 lines from the top. So what's interesting is that you take a look in the art scroll. He says that these words "mimad mara utmiya ani echra v'shem lakish meisib minei kuma Rabbi Yochanan mekabo minei." It says here in the Shemini Schos, "B'ksav yad leiden leisa v'yivosifu magia." And so there we had a little bit found out those long words a little bit choppy yesterday, so it's much easier. It would be much easier to start from V'yasivnei. That the Rabbi Yochanan just respond. Let Rabbi Yochanan just respond to Reish Lakish as follows. So that would take a Rabbi Yomana. It'd be a bit of a problem, but it's interesting that the Leiden doesn't have that whole sequence again. Being Madama Rabbi Yomana v'Tmiyani Eich Rabbi Yerushalmi Lakish Meisikum Rabbi Yochanan L'Kaminei, and just starts V'yasivnei. Okay. But let's start from the Yasimne today, since we already read that line yesterday. Regardless, the Yasimne let him respond. Lo matzanu davar ma'akev, lo davar shem ma'akev. Don't we find davar ma'akev, something which is an impediment, that's derived from something which is not an impediment, and davar shem ma'akev, something which is not an impediment, which is our topic here, Yerushalmi Yoma, for the days prior to Yom Kippur. Lo davar shem ma'akev, that can be learned from davar shem ma'akev, which can be learned from the why not? We have many examples like this, says Gemara. For example, there's a derivation of Haktorah from Malika by an Olas of Malika is Rosh Mizbeach, just like the Malika is at the top of the Mizbeach, the Malika on top of the Mizbeach. That's the killing of the bird. Af Haktorah, Rosh Mizbeach, so to the Haktorah is done, of course. The bird is placed on top of his Mizbeach. So Malika Makebes, yet we learn this out despite the fact that Malika is an impediment. Obviously, you don't have a kosher Olas of unless you do Malika. And Ein Haktorah Makebes. You don't have to the Haktorah. I mean, it's a mitzvah to do it, but you don't have to, because here it says as long as you did the mitzvah Adam, as long as the blood went to Mizbeach. Similarly, Tamid. We have Yerushalmi Tamid. Nemar Tamid b'chabitim. Just like it says Tamid by the chabitim, the pancakes brought to Kohen Gadol daily, in the morning and the evening. Nemar Tamid lechem apanim. It says Tamid by lechem apanim. Ma Tamid ha'amur b'chabitim, just like Tamid, which is stated by the chabitim, is Shnei Masor. There are 12 pancakes which are brought. After Tamid ha'nemar b'chabitim, after Tamid lechem apanim is Shnei Masor. Shnei Masor. Now the Gulin Hashatz points out, Moshe also, he says the Gersa should be the opposite. Because it says 12, it doesn't say 12 by the Chavitim, it says 12 by Lechem Aponim. So actually the derivation is from Lechem Aponim to Chavitim. If you take a look at the Moshe, it says the Lechem Aponim behead your ksibei shtei masir chalos. According to the Bavli, Asya Chuka from Lechem Aponim. Vayvasibu Chokolam. Vachadarish Dami Tami Dechsi B'Tarvayu. So there, by Tami we learn that this derivation of the 12 from Lechem Aponim to Tamid, not from Tamid from Lechem Aponim to Chabit, not vice versa. So again, according to Shas, Tamid Amur B'Lechem Aponim Shnei Masar, Tamid Amur B'Chabitim Shnei Masar, Lechem Aponim Ma'akev, and there Lechem Aponim is Ma'akev. What's interesting, in other words, it's integral to the Avodah. There had to be 12 chalos, whereas by Chavitin, it's not integral that there be 12 chalos. There are other interpretations, but most of them seem to go with the interpretation that the number of chalos is not ma'akeh by the Chavitin. The number of matzahs, technically speaking, because they're not chametz, but they are called chalos by Lechem Purim as well. So the the Kormei, for example, says that the shot that the like upon the bezichin or makiv like tiran and a chabitim makvin. If you were to mark them, it's not a problem, I guess, with the general avoiding base mikdash because it's kind of private korban kohen gadol. But it's interesting that all the Achronim point out the Meir Simcha, the Samech, his parish, and the Reb Chaim and the Offer Yerushalmi, that the Bavli argues. Bavli holds that since it says chukah by both of them, and in fact the Pnei Moshe brings down in the Bavli, the Gzeira Shava is based on the word chukah, which appears both by chok olam, as we said, which appears both by did we mention it? Maybe we didn't mention it. But Pnei Moshe says chok olam by both the chavitin and lechem aponim. So therefore, the number of chavitin also is makiv. Therefore, the Rambam does not bring down this Yerushalmi halacha. So, here according to Yerushalmi, the number of the lechem aponim is 12 is ma'akev. The by chavitin is not makiv. Okay, then now the next derivation, nemar lekicha. Lekicha. Sorry, it says lekicha, as the it says by the Pesach Mitzrayim. They says you're supposed to take agudas ezov in order to smear the blood of the Korban Pesach on the doorpost. Let's see if the Torah or it's brought down here. לקחתם אגודת איזו ותפלתם אדם אשר בסוף, קחתם משקוף ושתיהם זוזות מאדם אשר בסוף, אתם נצאו איש פסח בסוף הבוקר. So it says לקיחה by מצרים, ונאמר לקיחה בלולב. It says לקיחה by lulav as well. So מה לקיחה מול מצרים אגודה, it's you take an aguda, that's be all tied together. The agudos ezov is a bundle of ezov. So so too the lekicha, which is said by lulav, the lekachem b'yom rishon pri etzador kapos tamim nafeitzos rabbi nachal. It also is supposed to be a bundle. Okay, so avkicha mor b'lulav aguda and lulav ma'akev, and obviously the Yerushalmi is going with the opinion that Rabbi Yehuda in Masechah Sukkah that the egg is makev, right? So lulav makev Mitzrayim ain't a makeves. There was no, I guess, there's no derivation there that it was makev. So so here we learn out Harei Matzanu davar makev lo maybe davar shem makev. We see quite explicitly that we can learn out things which are impediments, things which are not impediments, and vice versa. So why was Rabbi Yochanan moeded to Reish Lakish when Reish Lakish asked him, as we saw yesterday, how can you learn from Elam Miluim to Yom Kippur? Hi, Elam Miluim, the Frosha is Makiv, and Yom Kippur the first time Makiv, and see Rabbi Yochanan can see the point. Why do you see the point? We have just found many places in which we learn from Makiv, later Makiv, later Makiv to Makiv. So I point out one thing before we go on, that on the Agudas Ezom in Mitzrayim is not Makiv. The Chaim says because the Ma'ir B'Kochim Uvoy B'Shina Kosav Lakiv. In order for something to be makach, it has to be repeated. I assume there are other ways, like chukah, which we say it's makach, but one of the ways is, shina kosel akev, and we don't have that or any other way of indication that it's an impediment. Okay, so that doesn't resolve that question. The Gemara goes on and says, but wait a minute. So Rabbi Shimon Lakish, he certainly holds about Frosha, so Rabbi Shimon Lakish, how do we learn about Frosha? Okay, he holds. We can't learn out the davar she'ena makiv, davar makiv. So how do we know Frosha of Shiva Yomi? So Shimon Lakish makshila. So Shimon Lakish is asks a question on Rabbi Yochanan's derivation. Minha ma'isel Shimon Lakish. Where's Shimon Lakish learn to have Frosha of Shiva Yomim of Yom Kippur? Because the Tani. So we learn from that which we learned in the Brayso. The Tani Rabbi Shmuel, named Rabbi Shmuel. Bezos Yobor Kodesh. It says Bezos Yavo Aron HaKodesh. Now it's a fascinating drasha. So then the here it's a Bekitzer, and the Bible it's more Barichus. As Korban says Kroy Yisera. It's not really Kroy Yisera, but it's the long language. The Havalei Memar Bezeh. It should be Zeh or Be'ela. And Reb Chaim explains a little bit more. He says that we're talking about par ben makar and an aisle, right? That's he has to bring the par ben makar and aisle in order to go into the Beis Hamikdash in order to Kodesh Kodashim. As the pasuk says, "B'zos yavah Aron HaKodesh the par ben kol chatas v'ailo." They're both male animals, so therefore, why does it say bezos? Should say either bezeh or be'ela. So therefore, drosh be'hachi. They were dashing like this: bezos haTorah amur be'inyan dainu b'miluim yavah Aron HaKodesh. Bezos HaTorah, which we dash notes. If it says Zois HaTorah, what's Torah? Talking about the Torah Miluim. Okay, so the let's see inside again. Bezos HaTorah, Amr B'inyan, Ma Amr B'inyan, Marfisha in the Bikurim, right? Miluim. Ma Amr B'inyan Marfisha also Kol Shiva Eved Kol Shiva. Just like there by Miluim, we said Mitzvah for 7 days, and Ovid all 7 days, and Mechanechim for 7 days. Avzeh Mafrish also Kol Shiva. We said Mitzvah for 7 days. Kol Shiva does have over 7 days. Mechanech also Kol Shiva, and we train him for 7 days. So says Mar, what are you talking about? Amr B'inyan? Miluim is mentioned here. How'd you get from Miluim? Bezos has a positive for Miluim, which is not at all the topic here, right? Reb Chaim asks a fascinating question. He says, "Wait a minute, Kol Shiva." He says, "Tzarachir the Miluim Moshe Shimesh Kol Shiva. Moshe served all 7 days." So he says, "Ubavli Isa Shemoshe Moshe Kol Shiva." Right? He gave over to him the avodah all 7, how to do the avodah all 7 days. So it's just like I guess the lashon mechanchen also. And he says Yeshlomer came with Samchu v'inifu karbanos mikashavos. It says it could be the Yerushalmi says that it was oven, not just the mechanechim, because they did the smicha and the tnufas. That's called the avodah. In any event, the Yerushalmi answers. How do we know how does Milu get here? Let me came which means bnei Aaron Amura be'inyan. Parasha Sachrei Mos. That's where the parasha of Yom Kippur is. Since the parasha, since bnei Aaron is mentioned here for Lo Mesa and Miluin, when they died during Shivas Miluin. Kamosha Amur be'inyan. It's as if it's stated explicitly. Miluim is saying explicitly, and Bezos therefore references the Miluim through the mention of the Misas B'nei Aaron. So Nu says the Gemara, I don't understand. You Eish Lakish just learned from Miluim yourself, right? So the late Sefer that B'Shem Lakish Mishmini Meina Kroi is B'Shem Lakish also learning from this pasuk of Miluim ultimately that Afrosh of the Kohen Gadol. So what are you asking on Rabbi Yochanan? Ela K'idish T'Shama Milo Makshela. So now finally we can come to understanding that Hashem did not reject Rabbi Yochanan, and he ultimately accepted him. And you can learn Davar Mashay Makim Makim. And he was just, as Korban says, also called him Mashay Davar Parchle Shmo Chaver Meravo in Gam Heim Stovin Kavose. In other words, it was a Masa Maton. He's having a discussion with him, not because he doesn't hold the Drasha, but he is asking, what about this issue, the impediment? So it was not actually, as we initially assumed, the Reish Lakish was refuting Rabbi Yochanan. He was asking him in the course of the learning, what about this issue? But ultimately, Imr Shimon Lakish learns out from Miluim. Rabbi Yosef Rabun said, no. Time Reish Shimon Lakish, Shimon Lakish does not learn out from Miluim. It says, he learns it by Ashken Kvod Hashem Har Sinai. Because Baruch Hu devolved his Shechina on Har Sinai, and Moshe needed to prepare himself for 7 days to go in. As the Kohen brings down Ashken Kvod Hashem Har Sinai, Vaychaser non Sheshes Yomim, Vayikra Hashem, Vayikra Moshe B'Yom HaShvi. Right? It says he called Moshe on the 7th day. Okay, so let's see inside. He was in the Aron for all 7 days, and then only was he able to go up on Har Sinai proper. of Aaron Lo Nichnasi V'nai Avdim, so that Aaron doesn't go inside V'nai between the Kosh Goshim, Achi Srabah Shemin Mishcha Kol Shim, until he is anointed in the 7 days for as preparation for his ascent into the Kosh Kodashim. Okay, but going back to the derivation from Miluim. So the Gemara asks, I'll daite the Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who doesn't need the word Zos and doesn't learn from Misas Bnei Aaron. So Lama Misas Bnei Aaron Amur Rabbeinu. Lama Misas Bnei Miluim. Why is Misas Bnei Aaron mentioned here? According to Shimon Lakish, we said it's mentioned here in order to reference Miluim, but Rabbi Yochanan obviously didn't need that. So that's the case. Why is it mentioned according to him? Amr Chia Barba said the truth is Bnei Aaron Bechad Bim Nisan Meisuli. Of course, they died at a completely different time of year. So V'lomu Maskim Yisas V'Yaku. So why mention the Parsha Yom Kippurim? Lamed to tell us the famous drasha. Shekashem Sheyom Kippurim Mechapa Yisrael, just like Yom Kippur is Mechapa for Am Yisrael. Kach Misason Shel Tzadikim Mechaperes Al Yisrael. So to the death of Tzadikim is Mechaper on Am Yisrael. And Amr Rabba Barbina. Remember that name. Lama Sama Kosa Misas Miriam Misa Parshas Para. A similar thing. Why is the death of Miriam juxtaposed in Parshas Chukas to Parshas Para? Lamed Chatisha Shekshem She'efer Para Mechaperes Al Yisrael, just like the Efer of the Para Duma atones for Am Yisrael. Kachmis, of course, atones for Tuma, but also atones for, as we know, according to the Rashi and the Droshas that on Cheta Egel. Lamed Shekshem She'efer Para Mechaperes Al Yisrael. Kach Misoshon Shel Tzadikim Mechaperes Al Yisrael. So the Tzadikim as tones for Am Yisrael. On Rabbi Yehuda Be Rabbi Sham, Lama Samakas Misas Aaron L'Shibur Haluchos. Why is the death of Aaron mentioned juxtaposed to the Shvias Haluchos? Says the Karmei Parshas Ekev. Ksiv Beisi Amar Shem Leib Solocho V'Gomer Ksiv Basrein says afterwards Ubnei Yisrael Nos Ubnei Eros Yabnei Akom Moser Sham Meis Aaron. Okay, so that's have juxtaposition of the Lucha Solocha making Lucha Shnios and Sham Meis Aaron. He says then he gives a different linkage. Inami Ksiv Sham Asimas Luchos Bon Shal Sisi Sham Kashet Tzibani Hashem Kashet Tzibani Kailu Shibei Luchos. Tzibani is going on. The Shiri Luchos also being in the Aron. Yeah, I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm so no. So in any event, it's in Parshas Ekev juxtaposition. So the Lamedcha to teach us Shem Yisrael Tzadikim Koshim Yakosh Baruch Hu. It's something which is difficult for Kosh Baruch Hu, even though it has to be done. But it's something which is just like Shibar Luchos had to be done. But it's something which is, of course, tragic, right? It's Shibar Luchos. Right, and the once we're in the pasuk in Ekev, we're going to darsha pasuk in Ekev. But it's an interesting korban Eidah here, which is worth seeing. He says, "In mispadim kalocha, lekach ne'amar kan sheyivku aleim b'yom kippurim." So we're supposed to cry on the another Baviu because it's Mitzvah's Chaperes only says Korban if there's a proper hesped on them. Okay, now the following drasha which we have is also brought down by Rashi and Chumash. It says that pasuk in Ekev it says Neison Nesum Yirosei Hakon Bnei Hakon Moseirot Sham Meis Aaron. And what do you mean? Chi Moseir Mos Meis Aaron. The Aaron that Moseira Follow Bahar the Mace. Right, the dog Steve as it says. By Aaron, Hora Pi Hashem. By Yom Hashem, he died in Hora, not a Moseira. Ella, rather, Mikeva, this is the story. Mikeva and Shemes Aaron, once Aaron died, and he stopped on their covered. Then their covered was dissipated. Bishua Kanan Mizgaros Bem. The Kananim saw, okay, Am Yisrael is vulnerable. Let's ambush them. Let's war against them. Therefore, it's that which it says there. It says in Bamidor Chafal, they came Derech HaSarim, the way of the locations. Israel, and he came and fought against the Jews. Mao derech hasorim. What does it mean? Derech hasorim, the way of the locations. So he says, Chazal Darshan, Ki meis hatayor hagadol shayot tor lohem es haderech. This is the great tour guide. As Korban says, Mishu Baki Bedrachim Nikra Tayor. Somebody who knows the pathways. It's called a Tayor, a scout, I guess would be a good translation. Shel Tura Oretz. He knows how to scout the land. So the Tayor Hagadol says is Aaron HaKohen. He's not a cover. So they therefore, since this Tyra Gadol left them, they came and waged war against the Jews. So I slipped up in a moment and said Tyra Gadol is Aaron. Reb Chaim says it is Aaron. He was the Tyra Gadol through the Ananiah Kavod. In other words, he was the great scout because in his chus the Ananiah Kavod existed, and therefore Meitzah Gadol is referring not to the expiration of the Ananiah Kavod, but the expiration of Aaron. Okay, it could be that maybe that's what the Karmeda means. Not sure. Anyway, so be that as it may, so the Ubikshu saw Mitzrayim. So the army saw they lost Ananiah Kavod. They're getting attacked. They're going to go back to Mitzrayim. And they went back 8 stops. Moshe had been 8 stops ago on the road before Har HaHor. And the Shevet of Levi ran after them to get them to come back. And there was a mini civil war. And they killed 8 families of the Korban brings down a curse of 7 families. Rashi Chumash goes with the curse of 7 families. That the 5 families from Binyamin, and Ehud from Shimon, and Itzvon from Gad. And the Korban brings down the 8th family, Yishva from Asher, but Rashi and Chumash evidently does not count them as being one of the Shvatim which are eradicated. Now, and then when it says, Avheim Orgu Mimenu Arba. So too they killed 4 families. The Am Yisrael, and that civil war killed 4 families from Shevet Levi. And the Korban says, name Levi, Ar Mishpachos, Achas Men Nekro, Gamre, Mishpachos Shimi, one of them was completely eradicated, Shimi, Sheshem Nego Ruben. And 3 of them, most of them were killed. V'nishu Misei Mispar, and they remembered very few. Mishpachos Amram, V'yitzar V'Uziel. And that the so then that's why the Gemara picks up and it says, well, wait a minute, we have Pasuk in Divrei Yomim. There's Lamaril, Yitzaril, Chavaniva, Uzieli. They did exist, right? It's right that the time in Divrei, it says Divrei Yomim. So they weren't completely eradicated, right? So the Gemara says, you're right, they were decimated. Amos Chazru, when did they come and they become again fruitful, multiplied? B'mei David. And in the days of David, these families were restored to, I guess, more significant strength. Although this evening, as it says, Yifrach b'yom of tzaddik, during his in his days of tzaddik, they were parech, they expanded, they blossomed. For rov shalom bli arech, and there was great peace without any setting, any diminishment, any diminution, like the diminution of the moon. So as the Korban, it says, Rov Shalom, Hebnei Levi Shem Rov Shalom Karon Pinchas. So there was the Rov Shalom. The people came back. The people of Shalom came back. Okay, so and where it says they said they made a cheshbon after this terrible mini civil war. Who caused us to have this blood spilled? They said we didn't do proper chesed. The chesed shemes with Aaron, and they didn't do proper hesed. I guess because they were discombobulated by none of cover, whatever the case may be. But the Yoshu hesed, they sat and they tied it together. They came up with proper hesped. V'gam l'tzaddik chesed, and they gave this Chesish Emes with Aaron, and Mokum, and the Torah therefore attributes them as since they made the estimate here, Kilu Meisham and Nikbasham, the Gamul Tzadi Chesed, as if he died there and were buried there and gave the estimate there, because that's where they actually gave the estimate. Okay, back out of the Agartha. The next one actually references something which we learned a few days ago in the art school. It was Dafnun Hema Beis in Shkolim. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yisrael Amar Asiris Ha'efa Umichnasayim Akvim. Right, it says they both are impediments to the kashrus of the avodah. Asiris Ha'efa, which a coin brings, which he's consecrated as a kohen, even a kohen hediot, and michnasayim, that they should be wearing the b'dei guna, specifically referencing in the michnasayim, are makiv. My time is zeh v'zeh asiyah. They both have the both are mentioned as asiyah. So the Psukim. It's actually one pasuk. Let's see some of one of Kacha. My bar mitzvah pasha is the tzava. See some of one of Kacha. Kacha shasibisi osocha. Shibas yamim matmei adam. So this is there are the they are because it says asiya, right? So the Moshe elaborates. Says my time is asir ksibu basir sefer ksibas yaseosa. The same Moshe selem yaselem michlesevad. For parshas tzabak ksiv zadav shetase marbina kol midei ksibu asir. Actually, I have to come on to all those other psukim. I think it's just this pasuk itself, because it goes in the Parshas Miluim. It says, I guess because the name of Chanina says, "Vasisran banav kol asher tzibi the Ramur Parsha Ma'akev." So therefore, he wants to say that Zev Asiya is separate. In other words, they're two different drashas. Not Rabbi Chanina is explaining. The Rabbi Chanina is saying Zev Asiya. That's the Psukim Bein Moshe brings down. Vayikra Zayin Tetzvav Yasosa and Shmos Chofei Mem Beis. And then the Rabbi Arachina says, he brings down the pasuk from Shmos Chof Tes Lamed Hey. It says, and that's his derivation. Okay, and then I was going to go on and discuss this further about Reina Tab Gimel and Ralph, and we have to go back and discuss this issue here of Ma'akev, because the Gilin Shas says that, the Rambam Paskins, it's not Ma'akev, and that was based on that Yerushalmi in Shkolim, in 7th Parak, where it said that in the Girs of the Yerushalmi itself, it says, but the Gra changes it to be in line with the argument over here and says Avodasim is Psula. And but the Rambam Paskins like the Kirsa Kshera, and Osi kind of makes a pshara, as we mentioned back there. He says that Sirius Efa is Ma'akev, it's a pediment, but it's impossible to avoid it. So, but in Amen, so there we had this discussion, and the Shas references it here as well, right? He says the Rambam says that it's not Ma'akev based on the Yerushalmi Tosefta at the end of Shkolim, and here it says Ma'akev, and he references the Gra changing the Girsa to Psula, which he says is possibly based on the Yerushalmi here. There is in the Vilna, there's interesting comment by the Mayone Yeshua. Yeshua says, "Ein ina divi ram masir sefer shekon hediot shel chinuch lasir sefer shel miluim." He says that no, the asir sefer mentioned here, which is ma'akev, is the asir sefer miluim, not the asir sefer of chinuch of the chinuch of the kohen. Obviously, all the other unfortunately don't like that, but it's interesting resolution of the problem by saying that avodas is takak shera. But that's by, like it says in Shkolim, but that's by the Asir Sefer Chinuch. The Asir Sefer, which is an impediment, is the Asir Sefer of the Miluim. Okay, we'll stop here for today.